There is not an established, there is not an established transition date with Harris County because there isn't an established transition agreement. It's a relatively small number. It's assumed there's a commitment to maintain whatever that staffing level is. As the City of Woodlands builds additional capacity as well, those patrol officers in the Woodlands, the 100 some odd officers, also then become available to patrol. So the City of Woodlands police officers, right? They also have the authority to patrol within Creekside. So you'll have your 12 as well as overlap from those additional officers. Maybe that question isn't answered. It could be all Harris County. It could be all Woodlands at some point. I think the goal is ultimately to get to all Woodlands. But that's the plan. But to remain committed to that minimum of 12, yes. Yeah.
I apologize, but they were saying that they can't get anyone in their recording, and they can't hear the question because they need to hear the question.
Oh, they need to hear the question. Okay. So let me answer this question. So I'm going to repeat the question so that I can make sure that the folks who are watching from home can hear. Okay. So the summary of the question, there's two parts, and I tried to answer your question, but the first is, what's the actual breakdown of who is going to be providing service to Creekside Park residents, right? Harris County, the Woodlands, what's the balance, right? The second question is, what happens if there's growth? Okay, I'm going to answer both questions. I'll answer the first again. So currently there are 12 constables who are dedicated to Creekside Park. There will always be 12 officers dedicated to Creekside Park. In some cases, it may be, over time, it may be 6 Harris County, 6 Woodlands officers, or 12 Woodlands officers, depending on how the transition works. So there will always be that commitment. As additional officers are added to the Woodlands Police Department, okay, it then creates additional capacity that can respond to Creekside Park as well. So you have Woodlands officers who are serving the other patrol districts, right, who are also available for that function. Now, when you're talking about population growth and community growth, right, what really matters with growth is how does it impact dispatch calls for service. That determines ultimately what you need. There is already built in an extraordinary capacity of additional reserve for proactive policing, okay? So there's room to grow, okay? The second piece is the type of growth has a real impact on what that looks like. So residential growth, especially in a community like the Woodlands, tends to have a pretty minor impact, if any at all, on how many calls for service you end up getting. Now, if you created a shopping center and you ended up or you created a new train station, for example, that's going to drive up calls in a way that will likely require so the type of increase. So one of the things that a new chief will do is pay very close attention to what those trends look like, and when it's time to add, you add. Okay? You had a question, ma'am?
Montgomery County is supposed to double in size in the next 10 to 15 years. That's not average growth, and you're saying that doesn't increase calls? The double in size in the county?
Well, I'm not. We didn't do any analysis in terms of what the law enforcement. So let me restate the question. So the question was, Montgomery County is expected to double in size, and that in 10 to 15 years, and that does not increase workload. So in Montgomery County, that growth will absolutely increase workload, especially at that magnitude for the police agencies who are responsible for providing that function. The Woodlands Township, however, okay, is largely built out from a residential perspective. There is additional development that's going to occur. Yeah, so not completely, but nowhere near a 10 to 15% growth rate, right? So that type of projection isn't going to have an impact in the near term, especially in terms of what this model looks like. Now, 10 to 15 years out, who knows? Like there's no one who can predict what staffing levels need to be in 10 to 15 years in any agency. But within a 5-year horizon, we're very confident of the numbers. Okay?
Hey, I have another question if nobody else does.
Get everyone to sit down, and then they wanted to bring the people around so that they can get the video in. The video camera is right there. So they're
Okay.
trying to
Okay.
get y'all to go around.
Could I ask folks to gather around the table, and then I'm going to answer your additional question. We want to make sure that the folks watching can see what's going on. Okay. No. Okay. So actually, since you asked a question, and there are a lot of other folks here, I'm going to ask. Would anyone else have a question I can be helpful with? You going to write it down? Okay. Okay. What's your question?
Is it best?
Did you want me to repeat it? Could you repeat it? I didn't. You go ahead and repeat it. I haven't asked it yet. Oh, okay.
No, go ahead, and I'll repeat it to the group. Yeah.
I happen to be at one for the public safety commissioner. We have a very difficult time hiring police now because there's a shortage of them.
Sure.
So is that been taken into consideration as we're hiring a brand new police department?
So your recruitment challenges are. So the question that was posed. I'm sorry. Your name is. Okay. So the question is, we as a department are having a hard time recruiting positions for the Department of Public Safety. Has that been taken into account as part of the analysis? Sure. So one of the realities is this is a hard time to be a police officer, right? There is a national culture which precludes folks who otherwise might have engaged from participating. That's a legitimate challenge. That is an operational challenge. Ultimately, what you want to do is build a recruitment plan that hopefully transitions, provides opportunities for county employees who wish to become Woodlands officers. So the structure that you develop ultimately provides that space. So that could be an option if there's space, if there's to protect those positions. But that recruitment question is an operations challenge that can't be avoided regardless of the jurisdiction. Yeah. So it's a wash.
If I can tag onto that question, because I was over a police department for 4.5 years in my previous city. So yes, Nelda, you're right. Nationwide, police recruiting is a challenge for a lot of people, and locally, right? But there are a lot of things that local departments can do that some don't, such as offering lateral transfer programs, allowing police officers from other departments to transfer in, not at the base salary, at the beginning salary, but at a higher salary based on their experience, right? So there's a lot of tools like that that a township or a city or a county can utilize when it comes to recruiting police officers. Having a dedicated recruiting officer just for the police department, separate and above your HR director and your HR function, was very effective for us in Mesquite. So there are several things. I will say also anecdotally that some of the feedback we've had from the law enforcement personnel who work and patrol here in the Woodlands is that they love working in the Woodlands. And so, we do have a fairly low crime rate in the Woodlands, and I think that is in and of itself something that's attractive to other officers in this area and who are actually looking to leave other areas and come to a much safer and much more stable community and continue their law enforcement career. So I have several very, very good friends who are police officers. So yeah, absolutely. Police recruiting, though, nationwide is a challenge right now because of the environment, but I think the Woodlands is probably better positioned than most cities in America to be competitive in attracting talented officers.
You have a question, ma'am?
Animal control.
Stay at the county.
The state requires a city with a population in excess of 75,000 to have an animal shelter.
So the animal control staff, so the question is the state requires that animal control be accounted for a city, that animal shelter be accounted for. So that is assumed as part of the facility investment plan for law enforcement. I do know that. Yes, I do. Yes, ma'am.
So there's not a potential that they would continue the contract.
County
animal shelter for animal control services and shelter.
I can't give you a firm answer to that. So let me include it in the frequently asked questions, and we'll provide a post to it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I
Got it. Okay.
I could say just like in the law enforcement model, there's three models. So contracting is still a model, even under incorporation. So contracting for county services at the county shelter would continue to be an option for a future city council and a county commission to enter into a contract to continue under that operation.
Absolutely.
Sheriff Henderson and Gable, depending on what his title is, both think that what you've come up with is not adequately funded. And I believe we are shortfall. Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. So the comment was Sheriff Gable and Constable Ryan, I believe. Constable Gable, don't believe that the model adequately funds. Okay, so I'll answer it in two buckets. The first is our process. With our process, we engaged with both of those gentlemen throughout the entirety of the law enforcement study. As we concluded our analysis, before we finalized it, we validated our assumptions. We ensured that all of the current services were fully represented in the models and that they were properly funded, and gave them an opportunity to provide feedback. We did not receive feedback. We had a positive reaction to that study. So that's kind of the first piece. The second piece is it adequately funded? There was a report that was issued by the developer that outlines a number of perceived deficiencies in the financial model. That report fails to reflect what's currently reflected in the township budget. It miscalculates the ultimate number of dollars that are committed years 1 through 4 of an implementation process. And in fact, the model is fully funded, those resources are available, and the tax rate will remain consistent.
I'm sorry?
What you just said. What if we're short? What's the plan?
I'm sorry?
What's the plan if we're short? You're saying your model's correct, it's really go out in 4 or 5 years. What happens in year 6? What happens year 6?
For staffing levels, you're asking, so what staffing levels years after year 5?
Based it on 18 numbers.
Yeah.
No, wait,
How do we bridge that?
yeah. So we based it on 18. So the question, what happens in year 6? We based it on 18 numbers. How can you ensure what happens in year 6? So there's a couple of things. One, the incorporation model was built in a period of time, but what's reflected in the actual calculations also reflects your current 5-year plan and budgeting process, which includes additional funds for vehicles, items sort of negotiated in transition agreements with the county that came afterwards. So those are fully reflected. The second question is, what do you do in year 6 and out? Okay, and the question is, you do the exact same thing for the Woodlands Township in year 6 and out that you would do if you were contracting with Montgomery County and there was an additional need. It's a net. So you're going to have a cost. If there's a cost increase that's unanticipated, you either deal with it in your current contract model or you deal with it as a Woodlands Township. It has a net zero impact on this community.
Well, we just kind of talked about that just a minute ago, but what is the plan for recruiting? Well, we just talked about recruiting police officers nationwide as a challenge, but one of the advantages the Woodlands has is it is a very safe community to begin with. Secondly, and that's the type of environment officers want to come and work in, right? And I've heard that from our current contract personnel who are patrolling here today, that they enjoy working in the Woodlands. So I don't think that we will be as challenged as many other cities in America who are unlike the Woodlands when it comes to recruiting. Secondly, there's a lot of different things that you can do to recruit police officers, right? You can have lateral transfer programs that allow you to hire officers from other departments to come in at a higher salary level so they don't have to drop in rank and drop in salary just because they transfer to an agency. So they're rewarded for their years of service in another agency. They're already trained, they're ready to hit the beat and start patrolling. There's a wide variety, just the work environment. So right now the township funds a 30-year capital plan, right, and is fully funded. So that means when a law enforcement personnel's squad car needs to be replaced, they're not asked to continue to drive it for an extra year or 18 months because the township doesn't have the money to replace it. We have the money to replace all of our capital items fully funded for 30 years, and that means those officers would get new vehicles when there's time to be replaced. They would get the best equipment, the best resources. I have a lot of very dear friends that I've grown up with who are police officers in different cities, and those types of things make a difference when it comes to recruiting and attracting people to come to patrol here in the Woodlands.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm going to open it up to other questions. There's a larger group here. So anyone else have a question we can answer?
Okay.
nationwide about police, defund police, all that kind of stuff. Have we seen any of this in Montgomery County?
No. That we are pretty isolated from that environment nationwide.
So the question is, so let me just make sure I get it correctly. So in the future, under the
I would
hybrid
have a
model,
hard time seeing
should
that
the
happen
county
here.
want to or should the township want to continue
Right.
contracting
Absolutely.
for services with
No,
the county, would new
I think that
agreements
would
need to be made?
few and
Okay.
far between
The
for that to
transition
ever happen.
agreement, which is currently a 4-year agreement. So as we've identified, it basically carries through year 5 to make sure that the counties are providing those services. At that point, there is an opportunity to continue that negotiation process, or should the county choose not to do so, the township would then be
I think
required to develop its own
I think we're very
capacity.
safe
But there's
from what happens
there's
in
no
some of
reason
those
to
other
believe
communities
why
that you see
that
on
would
TV.
that contract wouldn't continue. It adds regional value, it adds monetary value
Yeah.
to the counties,
No,
and provides an important service
I
to
believe we
township
are.
residents who are also
Very low
residents of
risk
the
for
county.
that.
Why don't we not and we, excuse me, I had a stroke.
Oh, no worries.
Why give,
Sure.
what's the negative part of not having police department?
What's the So the question is, what's the negative part? Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So he asked, "What's the negative part of not having a police department?" So I'm gonna say what we will not do is frame positive or negative attributes, but I can tell you what the implications are. Okay. Fundamentally, the fundamental difference between having your own police department and not is the ability to unilaterally define what your public safety strategy is and your law enforcement approach is in your community. Right now, under contractual arrangements, you have the ability to define that as it's limited by the contract, but ultimately the sheriff and the constables have ultimate authority on operations, public safety approach, and those kinds of
Okay.
things. So that's really the
Yeah.
fundamental
And-
difference.
And if I could add to Josh's answer, it really is an equity and a consistent level of services provided across 2 different county boundaries, because you do have different elected officials providing law enforcement in each county. So as a city, it's one policing model, one command structure, one police model in place, protocols, standards, training, everything is consistent, whether you're a resident of the Woodlands in Montgomery County or a resident of the Woodlands in Harris County. It's one policing philosophy. Everybody is trained. There's uniformity and consistency of service level. So that is, I think that's another way of saying kind of what Josh talked about.
Each county takes care of it.
So how do we do that now? Yes, each county takes care of it. That's correct.
Well, but understand the current county law enforcement personnel are elected officials, right? And so we cannot tell an elected official, an elected sheriff, how to police in the county. We can ask, we can work with them, right? But they have the ultimate say-so. So that means the elected official in Montgomery County determines his or her specific policing philosophy, and the elected official in Montgomery or in Harris County determines their specific and we try to work as a township with both entities, but at the end of the day, those elected officials determine how they want to operate their operations.
What do you think to that? The sheriff's departments are the sheriff of the county is elected, and the police chief is not. Is that right?
Correct. So the sheriffs. So your question is yeah.
That's what I don't like.
Yeah. So the sheriffs are elected under our current model, and under incorporation, the police chief is hired by the city manager in a council manager form of government. The city council hires the city manager, and the voters elect the city council. So indirectly, the voters still have a say-so, right? But under the incorporated model, a police chief is an appointed official. And under that model, it is intended to keep politics out of policing. That's just the philosophy of that model versus the elected policing model.
Okay. All right. Okay.
you guys notice the differential in hospital?
Yes, so the question is, as we interviewed the representatives of Harris County and Montgomery County, their law enforcement officials, did we recognize a difference in philosophy? I would say that's not an area that we plumbed, so I can't speak to whether there's a fundamental difference. There are operational challenges to policing a community from 3 different entities in terms of coordination, communication, overlap of service that are just natural operational challenges, right? Whether there are fundamental differences in philosophy between those elected officials, that's not something we could answer. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm hearing a lot of fear tactics being used to vote against incorporation. A lot of fear tactics, and that is and one of them is we'll be starting from scratch. We have nothing together, and we're just going to be starting all over, buying everything brand new. Right now, we're contracting from Montgomery, so we're already spending all that money. And so,
Yeah.
and we have all these great patrol. Where are they going to work once the Woodlands becomes a community? I mean,
Yeah.
they used to work here, so why would they want to work here again? So we're not starting from scratch. So these fear tactics are just, they're horrible.
So can I just start, and then maybe you can. So under today in our township budget, sorry, the question is.
Yeah, I'll try to repeat the question. So, one of the comment is generally you are hearing a lot of fear tactics as to why not to vote for incorporation. And one of the comments that you consistently hear is why would we would be starting from scratch? Why would we start and rebuild a police department when we have an existing contract model? And your question is why wouldn't we already paying for the services? We wouldn't be starting from scratch? Why wouldn't officers who work in the Woodlands as deputies be interested in working in the Woodlands as police officers? Okay.
So I will just reiterate. Right now, the township, through your township taxes, you already pay, funds 80% of the patrol officers who are on the street. The other approximately 20% are paid for by Montgomery County. So we're already funding 80% of the patrols anyway through your township budget. So you're talking about, the question was, it's going to be really costly, and that's, I think, comments that are being made. You're talking about paying the incremental difference that the county is paying. So, and then again, and I think the other part of your question was really about why would anybody want to come and work for the City of the Woodlands Police Department when they have a good job already? Well, again, I'll just share my own anecdotal. In the 13 months I've been here as president and general manager, and the law enforcement personnel I've spoke with love working in the Woodlands. And so it's maybe not necessarily the patch that you wear, but it's where you're assigned and where you get to work. And I think the Woodlands is an attractive place for any law enforcement personnel. And we have built in our budget we're already paying for the retirement system and the health insurance benefits and everything else that the county officers receive. So we're already paying that cost. So we could offer similar benefits. So you would think theoretically that the transition would be fairly seamless. Again, that's up to the officers if they would want to apply and come here. The county 20%, yes, would go away under the. Right. So the question was that yes, we're taking on an additional roadway expenditures and the additional incremental police or law enforcement budget that's currently funded by the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office and the Montgomery County Commission. So yes, so we are taking on, and that is reflected in the financial model that Josh went through for the last hour. So that those costs are built into that model. I will just touch on, and I know this is law enforcement, but I will touch on the question that you asked is, how is that possible that you can take on those additional costs? 3 years ago, we didn't anticipate receiving online sales tax revenue. The United States Supreme Court, I believe in 2018 or 2019, ruled in a court case called South Dakota versus Wayfair and said that online sales taxes must be remitted to the locality where those residents reside and they're online shopping. 2019, we didn't have any online sales tax revenue much to speak of. This past year, we received more than $4.3 or $4.5 million in online sales tax revenue that we didn't project 3 years ago. So that additional online, because of that Supreme Court decision, we've had additional sales tax revenue that actually does make it possible to fund additional services without actually increasing your property tax rate. Secondly, property taxes only fund about 36% of the township budget. So it is sales tax, hotel tax, and other taxes that make up that difference. So basically the economy and some of the Supreme Court decisions have really actually increased the financial position of the township in order to be, and that allows for some of these incremental costs to be taken on into our current budget.
Can I do a follow-up? Because my question is directly related to that. I saw it was projected 18.7, I think, % increase on internet sales tax specifically. What justifies 18.7? That's a pretty big jump.
Okay, well, we're going to try to get back on the law enforcement question, but I will ask your question. You questioned about the 18% increase projected in online sales tax. So I can tell you we are prohibited by the state of Texas and confidentiality laws to share with specific sales tax revenues by retailer, right? So we can't share those because it's sharing financial data for companies. But I can tell you, broadly speaking, that we are just now beginning to see the actual online sales tax revenue. In other words, we believe that there's continuing to be a very, very significant growth rate in online sales tax. And I can tell you there are some online retailers who have yet to actually start remitting sales tax to the township. We work with the Texas comptrollers to understand what those projections look like. And so we're fairly confident that the online sales tax revenue will continue to grow at a fairly high rate. So
That revenue comes also from COVID, people being at home, right? Predominantly.
so your question was that also happens from the online shopping? Yeah, right.
That will die as well.
Well, you would think, and we're going to try to get back to law enforcement questions, but there seems to be more and more Amazon delivery trucks coming in all of our communities on a regular basis. I don't know that the shopping patterns are going to completely change even after COVID starts to subside, but we'll see.
They're everywhere. Yeah.
Any other law enforcement questions?
Well,
I think we're getting the cue.
All right, thank you all. It is almost a little bit before 8 o'clock.